Welcome everyone to MailFuzz TV. I am Peter, and today I'm going to be talking about The Pitt, Season 1, Episode 10. It is 4 p.m. On the show. So this is a Patreon sponsored review. Thank you very much to Alison for picking the show. And of course, spoilers, as per usual, for the episode. So the last episode had a big ending with Dana getting punched in the face. And this one does follow up on that. And it's very grounded. Like, I don't know what I was expecting in terms of like a fallout from it, but obviously everyone's concerned and everyone is immediately like wanting to know what happened. And interestingly, she's very hesitant first of all to give an ID of who did this. I mean, she says it was obviously an unhappy patient, but they all want to know. Security guard as well wants to know, and is like, no, we're not letting this go. Like, who is it? Did you see who it was? And she does offer up the name. Ultimately, I suppose the more interesting things here, obviously it's nice to see everyone give a shit and everyone kind of gather around her and make sure she's okay, and we kind of see the news of it spread in other scenes as other characters find out. But the thing that stuck out more than anything here is one of the younger characters, I can't remember which one it was maybe either King or Javadi, I think, who said, you know, is shocked and says something along the lines of, who would do such a thing? And the others around, the other nurses, all basically say they've had some kind of experience with violence from, disgruntled patients. One mentions like a cheekbone being fractured or something like that. And they basically, obviously they're concerned for Dana, but they're not shocked that it happened. They're not surprised. And that's kind of the big takeaway here for this, is how normal this actually seems to them. Not that they're happy about it. In fact, we get a couple of big follow-up scenes. Actually, it's just one big follow-up scene, really. Outside of, like, Dana herself, like, getting, like, sort of mended, and she shares a nice couple of scenes with Collins, and they kind of laugh it off a little bit, and everyone feels lost without her running the floor because she's very good at it, and that's kind of a running thing throughout the episode. But the big scene that kind of follows up from it, more than anything, is the scene where the nurses are standing around with Robbie, and they're talking about how this is getting more and more common, and it's a whole thing. Now, I do have one slight critique here, right? This show, I should say, naturally brings up a lot of very big issues that are going on, right now, particularly in America, but a lot of it applies to other places as well. About the healthcare system, about their pay, about like these types of instances, violence and things like that, or the type of subjects, the type of things that the doctors and nurses encounter from patients on a regular basis. And we've talked a lot about the idea of parents and kids and like abuse and things like that, the sort of different subjects that they encounter just naturally through their job. And I think the show's very good at doing that, and I've had very little complaints in how it's handled any of that material pretty much up until now. There is one small moment in this scene where they're talking to Robbie, where one of the nurses has a line where they say, "This is a national crisis," and it felt like just for a second the dialogue stopped being dialogue and started being like a PSA to the audience. And it's the only time in this show up until this point, and this is episode 10. Right, so we've had 9 episodes where I have not felt this once. So there's just one little moment where it felt like we stopped to explain to the audience that this is an issue that's going on right now in a way that felt a little unnatural and a little bit more like an infomercial than an actual piece of dialogue, a part of an actual conversation that was happening. So I just want to get that out of the way. It's not a big deal. It's one fleeting moment, and it's not like it continues then after, because afterwards the scene's actually very enjoyable. Because of how it's then handled, where Robbie's frustrated and he's trying to deal with it, and it's actually when the boss lady comes down and starts asking questions about Dana, where Robbie basically just mentions that all the nurses are, if they don't feel safe, they're not going to come into work, and kind of sicks them on her and sneaks away as they're all giving valid concerns about why it's they feel unsafe at work and the problems that are happening, because Robbie very slyly, as he's talking to her in front of the nurses, says, you've denied my request for more staff and more security 3 times in the last few months. And they all get to hear that. He intentionally says that out loud so they all know that he's tried to up security and he's been shot down. And she has to turn around and she says some really stock answers, and this is not even specific to healthcare. This is very stock like employer bullshit where she's like, we are here a family and we care about each other and we care about you, and it sounds so phony, and then Robbie just sneaks away like tiptoe style, like a thief in the night. It's actually very entertaining and a very light scene, despite the fact that it's addressing a very big concern and their right to be voicing their concerns. It ended up being kind of a jokey little ending to it, which was entertaining. So enjoyed that moment. And as per usual, there's a lot going on here outside of the aftermath of the Dana attack. There's a lot of stuff here. I guess one of the big things to get into is Santos and Langdon, which sees a bit more of a conclusion, or at least a major turning point in this episode. And you know what? I did not believe Santos was onto something that was accurate. I thought she was being overly vigilant for something because she wanted to find something, and she wanted, she decided she didn't like Langdon, and she was going out of her way to try and create something that maybe wasn't there. I was on record in previous reviews as saying that this was going to blow up in her face, and she was going to have egg on her face, and this was going to be cringy because she was wrong. Turns out she wasn't actually as wrong as I thought she was. She was onto something. And the interactions that both her and Langdon have with Robbie, where Langdon does start to look a little bit concerned that she's talking to him, and does kind of come up and give his concerns about her and that she's not as much of a team player, that this place does function like a team and we have to trust each other, and I'm the one getting targeted by her because I'm the one calling her out on it, but like she is kind of causing some troubles here or there. She's making fun of the others, she brings up the way she's treated the other student doctors and so on. And it did feel a little bit like he's suddenly a bit more concerned. I did notice that. But I still kind of had the opinion that I wasn't really convinced that she was right about what she was accusing him of, about taking some medication, and like there'd been some kind of discrepancy going on there. So when she brings it up, but when Robbie pulls her aside and says, hey, if there's something you need to bring up, if there's something you have to tell me, it's your duty to do so. And we don't actually see the rest of the conversation. We just see her pull out the little vial. And she clearly is going to tell him everything she's already brought up before, and it leads to the big final scene of the episode where Robbie confronts Langdon about this, takes him to his locker, and insists that he check his locker. He has to check, right? He has to look into this and take it seriously, which I appreciated. I appreciated him taking it seriously, and it's notable as well that throughout the episode, he went out of his way to say, "Hey, Langdon, you did a good job teaching Whittaker," because it was kind of like there's a few things this episode where Robbie kind of like doesn't make amends, that's not quite the right word, or the right phrase, but he goes out of his way to try and prop up people that he's had conflicts with in the last episode or two, and like he's grilled them out for things. Like he's going out of his way to say, hey, you're doing a good job now. Like he's not trying to hold grudges, I guess, is what I'm saying. He's trying to show that they can move on, and that he can like acknowledge that better effort is being made, or whatever it is. So I like that little moment because it added a bit more weight here to the end when Robbie loses his shit, when Langdon's kind of saying this is crazy. But notably, and this is something Robbie's clearly also noticing, but Langdon never actually says the sentence, I have not taken any drugs or medicine. He never says that sentence. He just sort of acts shocked and is like, oh, this is bullshit, it's bullshit. But he never actually says the sentence, I have not done the thing she said. He never actually says the actual words. Which is maybe the first sign, I think, to me anyway, who was kind of adamant up until this point that he hadn't been doing that, oh, maybe he actually has done something. Maybe there is something here. Maybe it's not exactly what she was accusing him of, but maybe there is something to find here, but there's some reason why he is upset that his locker's being researched. So, Robbie drops an F-bomb and, like, punches the locker and, like, insists that he do it. He does, and he finds something in his locker. And Langdon, tries to explain it is that he's just trying to wean himself off some painkillers for when he got hurt. When he's like, hey, I got hurt when I was helping someone move house or whatever, and tries to justify it. But Robbie's like, no, you're done. Leave now. I'll have you escorted out, and there'll be more of a scene, and like throws his stuff at him. And it's like a whole dramatic ending. It feels like it's kind of heavy. And it's actually kind of hard to believe that we might just not have Langdon for the last 5 episodes. I feel like we're going to see him again, and I don't know in what context we will, because it's hard to believe that he will be back unless, like, I don't know, like they're just so short-staffed after this, because they're already running pretty thin. that maybe without Langdon they're going to struggle, and maybe like Robbie will have to bring him back in or something. But it feels like he shouldn't be back today, given what's just happened. It feels like there's going to be a proper inquiry and so on and so on, and whatever the procedure would be when a doctor's caught doing this. But he insists that he's not an addict, and he's still working to the best his ability and so on. But Robbie's like, no, I let this happen under my watch. He clearly is pissed at himself, if nothing else, as well, because he didn't catch this, and sends him away. And that's the big ending to the episode. So yeah, it's this is an interesting turn. That Santos, much like she did with the dad and the daughter, right, and like sort of sensing what was going on there, and or not even sensing, the mother did bring it up, but like she had kind of like a keen eye on that particular case. And I think here this is showing that she was catching something. There's maybe still an abrasiveness to her, right? And I think that's something that even before all the Langdon stuff was set up, she was like being, jokey in an almost combative way with the other student doctors way back in episode 1 by giving them nicknames and making fun of, like one losing a patient, one fainting, so on and so on. Like she has this combative nature to her, which is something she probably does have to work on. But she was right about this, and we have to kind of like give her props for that, for actually catching this and doing something about it. And the episodes, definitely did make me think that she was wrong, and that this was her kind of barking up something that wasn't true. And if anything, it's weird that like they set this up, and I was so convinced it wasn't true that it was a surprise when it turned out to be true. And I'm curious to see the fallout of this for Santos specifically, what the others are going to think if they find out. And I assume they're going to be talking about why Langdon's not here, right? Is Robbie going to tell them the truth? Is he going to lie and give some kind of, he was called away because he had a thing to go do. And I suppose one of the hints that maybe there was something a little impulsive about him is it's brought up again about him buying a dog out of nowhere, and he wanted to go buy salmon as a surprise for the family. And the other characters are all kind of talking about how much of a, just how much he is, like how much extra he is. This is actually one of the couple of scenes where we get the two nurses talking in a different language, because there's a scene here where they're basically just talking about who's having sex with who. This was something that we saw them do back in like episode 1 or 2, but they've kind of not done it for a little bit. But it was a nice thing to bring back here. Especially since when it's Robbie and Collins next to each other, like if they had sex, and the other one's like, yeah, definitely. So that was it was just amusing. It was a little bit of lightheartedness in between the other stuff that was going on. So yeah, maybe they were trying to seed this idea that he is this kind of hyper personality, and part of it is maybe an indication that he was on something, or he is whatever. I don't know. But definitely the ending was really, really well handled. That's the thing here, is that regardless of my expectations going into it, the actual scene itself was very well performed. And when Robbie did get loud and he did bang the locker, it felt like a shot to the heart. It felt like, oh shit, like we're getting serious now, in a way that really stuck out. And Robbie has a few good scenes. Another thing with Robbie this episode is the stuff with the teenager and the mother, right? And the police showed up at the end of the last episode. So it turns out very quickly that Mackay was the one who phoned the police. And Robbie immediately is like obviously pissed about this. He's like, no, I told her to stand down. I said we were going to feel this out and do whatever. So he's mad that she kind of went behind his back and did this. And it takes him a little bit to find her. He's obviously very busy doing other stuff. But when he does find her and he confronts her about it, she notably does not react to his confrontation with like the idea that she has been caught doing something bad. She stands her ground and makes it very clear that she would not have lived with herself if something happened to a bunch of girls and she had a chance to stop it. And that, Robbie's saying, yeah, but now you might have ruined this young guy's life forever. And she's like, yeah, but like, is his life worth more than a list of other people? That's the list of these girls. Are all their lives worth not like at least taking this seriously? And she stands her ground. So this kind of starts off as a scene where he's going there to kind of cheer her out for kind of like going behind his back. But by the end of the scene, when she makes her point and walks off, he's kind of left there standing. And you can't really feel that he had the upper hand at the end. At the very least, you feel like, no, she was making good points. Like, as much as he might disagree with the action she took, he can't really argue that she's like incorrect or is doing something out of bad faith. And sure enough, later in the episode, he finds her and basically admits that he wasn't really thinking about all he was thinking about was this young guy, this boy, and that, you know, what might happen to him. He didn't really stop to think about the potential victims in the scenarios. He's basically admitting that, well, he's not pleased that she went behind his back. He's admitting that he was in the wrong in the way he was thinking about it. So it's showing that, you know, he is still learning, right? And everyone's still learning in here. Like, Mackay is learning, and, you know, he has her do a procedure at one point in this episode, and as well as all the students who are obviously still learning constantly throughout the episode. But all of this, the senior staff are all learning still, and that's something that the show keeps putting forth throughout. So yeah. Speaking of outbursts, one of the subplots is about a teenage boy who got hit in the eye with a baseball at his baseball game. And the dad's very like, oh, my son's a great baseball player. He's going to be pro. He's doing this. He's doing that. He won't shut up about getting him back on the field. And the kid's eye's pretty messed up. It needs to be cut open to drain the fluid, and he needs a little bit of surgery or whatever. And this plays out over the course of a few different scenes, but he's constantly clearly just thinking about, oh, he'll be fine like in 2 days, right? So he can be back on the field on like Thursday. And eventually Javadi just blows up at him and says, enough with this effing baseball. He's scared that he might not be able to see out of that eye anymore. Go be a dad. And she storms out. And it's like, obviously this is wrong what she's doing, even though every single person watching is probably going to be sympathetic as to why she's frustrated at this dad's attitude. And Mackay kind of doesn't chew her out for it, just kind of says, yeah, we can't, you know, you can't do that. You have to kind of keep your emotions in check, regardless of your feelings on it. But it does point out that he might not be just some monster who wants, you know, his kid to do exactly what he wants, right? I mean, that may be partially true, but this also might just be how he's coping with the fact that he's a parent and his child might have a very serious, you know, life-changing injury. And like this might like derail everything that either him or his kid wants. And you know, it's not necessarily this awful thing that he's focusing on something so much, because effectively all he really keeps doing, if you take out the baseball, is saying, is my son going to be okay soon? Like, he wants it to be minor, he wants it to be something that is not sticking around. And obviously she's kind of alluding to this idea that Javadi's recognizing some of her own like stuff in this father-son relationship, and this idea that her mother has got all these ideas for what she wants her to be, and she's recognizing that, and that's what's making her blow up in his face, which is something that I think most of the audience are going to get before Mackay even suggests it in the scene. Arguably, I might have said that she doesn't need to actually bring it up as much as she did. It's almost like they explained it maybe a little bit too much for the audience, but I had no complaints really, because it was a well performed couple of scenes, and I think it's one of the more disgusting things in the show is them cutting out the bit next to his eye and seeing the blood pour out. That was pretty nasty, as was the cutting into the burn patient victim, or the victim, the burn patient, not victim. It was an accident, but you know, and that's like another subplot in the episode, which is this guy who's like, he was filling up a gas tank or something, and it blew up, and he's been burned all over his body, and they're doing a lot to try and help him breathe. At one point they have to cut like basically just slots in his like sides and stomach to let him help him breathe, or across his sternum or wherever it is. And we get like a close-up of like the burned flesh kind of peeling apart as Whittaker cuts through it. And I thought that was particularly nasty looking as well. So they're keeping up their disgusting. It feels weird to call them gore effects when it's a medical show, but it's still gore. It's medically accurate gore, but it's still gore. And there's a whole bit here with the patient's wife is there, and she's scared and she's pregnant, and she's being, you know, really kind of, you know, really nervous. And Whittaker's the one who's kind of talking to her and trying to keep her calm. And they live in a farm, so he bonds a little bit with her by saying he came from a farm, and she invites him to dinner, and he's trying to keep her calm. The downer of this plot, though, is that when they take the burn patient away, after they explain, it's him and Langdon explain to her that, oh, he's going to go get treatments and skin grafts, and he's going to get this and that. After they've filled her with all this hope, Langdon turns to Whittaker and says, yeah, we were just trying to give her some false hope. Like, there's a 90% chance he's dead within a week because of sepsis or something else. Like, there's so much that might kill him because of these injuries in the next week. So, you know, it's probably not going to be a happy ending here. And like, Whittaker's left a little bit awestruck by that. Like, he did not see that coming. He actually thought that he was telling the truth, and he was giving her genuine hope as opposed to false hope. So that felt like a little bit of a cold, harsh reality moment for Whittaker. So yeah, I mean, I think that plot line, you know, like we typically have one or two of these cases in an episode where we get like a full story that plays out. If anything, there's usually a couple of more serialized ones that are still going. I think we kind of ended a lot of the serialized stories that were, you know, or medical cases we had for a big chunk of the first half of the season, just in the last couple of episodes. So this one felt like most of them were fairly self-contained. The third big one of the episode is actually Mackay's ex. I don't know if they were married, but, you know, her ex, the father of her son, because her son shows up. She actually gets bailed out from getting talked to Robbie early on in the episode because her son shows up, and Robbie has to kind of just deviate from the conversation. Turns out her ex was skateboarding and broke his leg. Ends up being in 3 places. But he's just an unlikable prick the second he comes in. He's making all these little comments, and everyone is just kind of like, oh, we finally get to put a face to this name that we've heard about. And he's just, like, unbearable, pretty much. Like, not the most unbearable, but just, like, enough unbearable. Like, everyone's like, yeah, he's the worst. And Mackay's making comments. It's Collins that actually sort of takes him as a patient, though. And the big reveal here, whilst he's, like, under and he's heavily medicated, so he's very high, he starts talking about like, you know, what does he have that I don't have? And there was basically a small sequence that implied that the reason why he was skateboarding with his son is that Mateo babysits for Mackay sometimes, and Mateo had taken him skateboarding, so the ex was trying to show that he could also skateboard. And when he's doped up, he starts saying, what does he have that I don't have, just because he's younger. And it's basically showing that he's still, even though he's with someone, because they mention a Chloe at one point, that's his current partner, he's clearly very jealous of the idea, and he's convinced that, you know, he even says at one point, do you think she's having sex with him? And one of the nurses like, well, if she isn't, she should be. So again, it's a very amusing plot for the most part, even though it does obviously flesh out a little bit of Mackay's personal life a touch. A few things come out of this. One is that there's a moment with Collins where Collins clearly gets a little upset because of what she's going through, because Mackay says that, well, as much as she hates his guts, she's happy about what happened because it meant that she got her son, and that he makes it all worth it, and that makes Collins a little bit sad. Also, she implies that his current partner, Chloe, has something to do with her ankle bracelet. I'm not really sure how to, like, read that. That feels like a very complicated bit of the story, honestly. Is she wearing the ankle bracelet because her and the new girlfriend get into a fight, or did his new girlfriend like report her for something? You know, those are the two obvious things that spring to mind that it could be, but I don't even know if they'll elaborate on it much. I don't know if they need to, but they've brought it up, so I feel like we might get a little bit more of it at some point. The other thing that comes out of this, though, is that she goes up to Mateo and is talking to Mateo about what's going on and blah, blah, blah. And Javadi's standing right there. And if you remember, Javadi tried to ask Mateo out on a date last episode, or maybe it was 2 ago. But regardless, she's standing there, and the little joke here is that she starts getting jealous, thinking that there's something going on between them as well. And it sounds like it might be because Mackay's very casually saying, hey, this new foot massage place opened up. Are you free Sunday? Because I really want to go. And Javadi really awkwardly jumps in and says, I'm free Sunday. I'm free. I could do a thing. And then the reveal here is that Mackay says, oh, wait, no, that's a great idea. My son would love a babysitter that's closer to his age. And she hugs Javadi. So Javadi basically, it seemed to be assuming that there was some kind of, like, you know, date or like outing as friends plan between Mackay and Mateo. But what was actually happening is that Mateo was agreeing to babysit, and it sounds like something that he normally does. Because Mateo did say when Giovanni asked him out that he doesn't date people he works with, and it was kind of sounding a little awkward in this scene because it felt like, oh, maybe he was lying just to like let her down easy, which would make him a dick if this was like a date arrangement in front of her, but obviously it wasn't. It was completely innocent. They were just arranging to babysit. It was just really funny that the jealousy that Mackay's ex had kind of became Giovanni's same jealousy, where she was starting to feel a little bit jealous in this scene. Not in an unlikable way. It's obviously very innocent and kind of funny, and just a little bit cringy, but that was a whole thing as well. So, yeah, I mean, I think that plot line was generally very pleasant. I mean, honestly, yeah, I feel like this episode kind of kept things mostly a bit lighter. And I think part of that is probably because the last one ended with such a hard-hitting moment, and then this one's going to end with a hard-hitting moment in a different way, of course. But you know, the revelation with Langdon and him being thrown out at the end by Robbie is such a high drama moment that it kind of felt like they were keeping things more light for the most of this episode. Not all of it, of course. Obviously, the burn victim's wife, you know, being all happy, and then the gut punch of, oh, he's probably going to die. Like, so it wasn't all good stuff, but there was definitely some good stuff. Oh, and I'd even mention there's a young woman who comes in who had a stroke, and she's in her 20s, and they obviously think that's like, whoa, a stroke in their 20s, that's kind of wild. And they're trying to figure this out, and it's Samara who's mainly taking the point on this patient, and they're trying to figure things out. They give her some treatment. She makes a judgment call at one point about what to give her. Which King kind of admits that, hey, you went with your gut and I kind of doubted you. I'm sorry if it sounded like I didn't. Because she kind of doesn't dispute her heavily, but kind of says, wait, is that the right move? It ends up helping her, though. They catch her early enough that they kind of change things, and they get her speaking. She wakes up and she was able to tell them their name and so on. So I don't have too much to say about this plot, other than a couple of little teaching moments. One where Robbie makes a joke, which is kind of a follow-on because the stroke specialist who comes down to like consult on the case makes a lot of dumb doctor jokes where I can't even remember any of them. Yeah, a nervous dinosaur or the answer was a nervous Rex. Anyway, it's a bunch of dumb doctor dad jokes, and he keeps saying them, and Samara explains to King that that's just kind of his special sauce. That's like his weird gimmick where, you know, laughter's a good bit of medicine. It releases endorphins, and it's kind of become his thing. And after they have the whole plot with the patient, King says to Samara, hey, maybe that's your secret sauce. You went with your gut. And she worries that she doesn't have her own secret sauce, and Samara's like, yeah, you will. Just be yourself. It'll show up eventually. Because I think the idea that, like, Samara didn't know what her secret sauce was before. In fact, when King asked her, what's your secret sauce, she kind of just stumbles a little bit and tries to come up with something. But she doesn't really know what her secret sauce is, and it's something that no one probably knows what it is until it develops, I suppose, you know, over time. So... but yeah, that was the other plot, and even that was relatively feel good in the end because it had a positive result. So, you know, they were kind of keeping us, you know, it makes me wonder actually if we're going to get really dramatic and really dark. Maybe there's going to be a lot of tragedy in the next couple of episodes because this is the calm before the storm kind of thing. And notably, Robbie said there was only a couple of hours left on this shift. I can't help but notice that there's 5 more episodes, so it suggests that some reason keeps them in the hospital for a little bit longer. As I apparently the doctor, I'm dying here. What's going on? But anyway, that's the review. I think my big thing going into the next one is just how they handle the fact that Langdon's not there. And do we in any way still see him? Like, do we still follow him? Because we've not really followed characters away from the hospital, right? But the gimmick of the show primarily has been to stay at the hospital, and everything's only what they find out or hear about in the hospital, whether it be from the TV or people who are coming in and out or whatever. I wonder, like, how we deal with that. Does Langdon trying to come back in some way? I don't know. But I'm curious to see how we follow up in that. And it's the sort of thing as well where they might not do anything with it next episode, at least from him directly. At the very least, some people are going to ask where he is. Like, at the very least, that's going to be in the next episode. I would have to assume. Yeah, I think more than anything, there was just lots of little character moments this episode, little things that just made sense based on, like Javari blowing up at the dad who had all these ideas for his son because it ties to her story. You know, King worrying that she doesn't have a secret sauce. Whitaker again being as ultra positive, only to have his gut punched once again. And even being like nice enough and humble enough to say, no, you can't call me doctor quite yet. I'm student doctor. I got a little bit to go before you can call me that. But yeah. Anyway, solid episode. A lot of stuff going on. Curious to see how we handle this Langdon stuff going into the next one. But let me know what you thought of this episode in the comments below. Like, subscribe, all that usual stuff. Helps out a bunch if you do. And of course, if you want to support all the content, you can do that over at patreon.com/MaileFuzzTV or via YouTube membership. Thanks to everyone who already does support us. But that is me. So thank you once again for watching or listening. I always appreciate it. Keep watching TV. Have you got any vanilla?